Now, I want to preface this by saying I don't think this is going to happen. But for everyone out there before the season started talking about how they're tired of the same teams, they're tired of Ohio State, they're tired of Clemson, ironically, it might be because those teams are down that we get not 2, but 3 SEC teams in the college football playoff. A lot has to go right for the SEC to have this happen, but there are multiple scenarios where it could happen. Now, let's just take a look at the overall FPI of the SEC and where things stand today. So you have, this is the craziest thing about it, you have Georgia and Alabama right now today. Playoff chances, 84% for Georgia, 82% for Alabama. I think those numbers are way too high, especially Alabama's number. Georgia's is probably, I'd put it at about 75% chance. They just don't face anyone until the SEC Championship. They have a very easy schedule. Then you have, obviously, those two teams are 1 and 2. Florida at number 6, and Ole Miss at number 9. And these are the 4 teams I really want to focus on when it comes to the college football playoff. All of these teams down here, you could say Arkansas is 4-0. I don't see it with them at all. They're going to lose 2 or 3 games at least by the end of the season. It's these 4 teams, right? These 4 teams. You got to think at this point, with with the way the other conferences are going, with what happened to Clemson, with what's going on with Ohio State, Oklahoma's not looking too good. At this point, there's going to be a lot of people saying the SEC minimum is going to get 2 teams into the playoff. But can they legitimately get 3? So the number one thing that we need to root for this weekend is for Alabama to beat Ole Miss. Because you take a look at Alabama's schedule, let's say Alabama loses to Ole Miss. They're not losing to A&M. I don't know how A&M is ranked 15th. They're pretty much a lock to win all of these games. They're not going to lose to Arkansas at home. They're not going to lose to Auburn. Auburn shouldn't even be ranked. They had SEC refs help them beat a FCS school last year and moved up a spot in the AP poll. So that's great. But the point of this is we need Alabama to beat Ole Miss and just go undefeated. That's what we need. Knock Ole Miss out of this. Get Ole Miss 1 loss. Let's take a look at Ole Miss's schedule. Ole Miss right now, 3-0. They've got at Alabama versus Arkansas, probably going to win that game. And you just can take a look at the rest of their schedule. Maybe the Texas A&M game could be tough. It's at home. The Auburn game is away. But again, Auburn has not really been very good. So the idea is, this is the main issue. Let's say Ole Miss beats Alabama, right? Let's say they beat them. So they have the head-to-head now in the SEC West. They could even lose a game to an LSU, to an Auburn, to a Texas A&M, and still make the SEC Championship. Even if they lost the game. Now, that's another key scenario because if they go in undefeated, to the SEC Championship undefeated, they're going to make the playoff no matter what. That's what Georgia's looking like at right now. Let's take a look at Georgia's schedule. Georgia beats Clemson. Turns out to be not really that big of a win. They have the big game with Arkansas. Their really big game this season, because I think they'll beat Arkansas. They're 18-point favorites. Their big game is the neutral site game against Florida. So if they run the table, and ideally they're going to be favored in all of these games, you'd think they would, they're going to go to the SEC Championship game, basically a lock for the college football playoff because they will have no losses. If Ole Miss runs the table, beats Alabama, beats all of these teams, I don't think that's very likely because I don't think Ole Miss's defense is very good. It's not that A&M's great, but I just think one of these teams will probably knock them off. But let's just say for the sake of argument, Matt Corral, they have a great offense. We understand that. If they go into the SEC Championship game undefeated along with Georgia, both those teams, no matter what happens in that game, are going to the college football playoff. And Alabama now, who was 1 loss would be to Ole Miss, they win out. Now they have 1 loss. They don't even make the SEC Championship game, so they don't have an opportunity to lose again. They're going to be claiming to be in the college football playoff. Well, how does Florida fit into all this? Well, let's go to Florida. Florida right now has 1 very close loss. People were saying they should have moved up the rankings after losing to Alabama. You've got Kentucky, Vanderbilt at LSU. Maybe they lose to LSU on the road. I don't know. And then the huge game with Georgia. Let's say this is where it gets crazy, but I will guarantee you if Florida wins out except the Georgia game, let's say they lose the 1 game, so they have 2 losses. Let's say they lose a really close game to Georgia. People are definitely going to be saying that a 2-loss Florida team should be in the college football playoff. Let's say they beat Georgia. Well, then they go and face Alabama then they go face Ole Miss or Alabama in the SEC Championship. Now you have a 1-loss Georgia team that doesn't make the SEC championship game, so they're not going to have an opportunity to pick up another loss. If Florida wins the SEC championship game against maybe an undefeated Alabama team or an undefeated Ole Miss team, those teams, whoever goes to the SEC championship game undefeated is making the college football playoff. We know that. That's the main issue. Ideally, you want these teams you want Alabama versus Georgia to be an elimination game. So you want both of them to have one loss going to the college football playoff. The best case scenario is, let's say, Georgia wins out. It's very tough to see Georgia lose a game. The best case, though, is Georgia loses to Florida. Let's say Florida loses one. Who is Florida facing? Maybe they lose to LSU. That's really the only other chance they have. Good Lord, look at their schedule. At Kentucky. Kentucky almost lost to Chattanooga. People are trying to hype them up. Versus Vanderbilt. My God, they're the worst Power 5 team in college. Power 5 team in college football. At LSU, they could lose that game, maybe. At South Carolina, Samford. At Mizzou versus Florida State. The ideal scenario, and it starts this week, what we really need to have happen, I'm telling you guys, we need Alabama to beat Ole Miss. We need Ole Miss to have that one loss. It's so important because if Ole Miss wins the game against Alabama and Alabama wins out, even if Ole Miss suffers a loss, they would be going to the SEC championship game because they would have the head-to-head in the SEC West over Alabama, and then the nightmare scenario there would be, let's say Ole Miss, even if they suffer a loss, they win the SEC championship. They're obviously in the playoff. They face an undefeated Georgia team, or even, it would be an undefeated Georgia team. The best case scenario, I think, is Ole Miss losing to Alabama, and then let's say Ole Miss drops another one of these games. So Ole Miss is out of the picture completely. They have 2 losses. They're out of the picture. They don't even make the SEC championship game. They're done. And then you have, Alabama. Ideally, it's probably very unlikely, losing one of these games down here. I don't think it's going to happen. Realistically, if they beat Ole Miss, they're not going to lose to A&M. The best case would be they lose to A&M, but realistically, if they beat Ole Miss this weekend, they're very likely going to the SEC championship game undefeated. We would love to see Florida defeat Georgia, and that would set up, and then that would mean Georgia is out. Now that it would make the argument for Georgia, they only have one loss, but they wouldn't make the SEC championship game. It's just this whole thing. They're probably still in the playoff. If they have one loss, even if they don't make the SEC championship game, they're going to try and put as many SEC teams in the playoff as possible this year, with Clemson and Ohio State being down. So everyone, listen, I love, the difference. I love when new teams make the playoff, but it's like with Clemson and Ohio State not having 2 of those spots locked up, you were opening the door to all of this SEC crap. Let's say Oregon doesn't win the Pac-12 championship game for whatever reason. They have a suspect offense. I don't think they're a lock. I mean, it's an easy conference, but, maybe they don't make the playoff. The Big Ten is a mess right now when you look at it. I mean, the Big Ten is a lot of teams that are undefeated. I understand that. You've got Penn State, you've got Iowa, you've got Michigan. It's going to cannibalize itself. That's the problem. It's going to cannibalize itself. And then you still have Ohio State that faces all those teams. They're probably going to beat some of them. It's a mess. The ACC is getting nobody in, right? Notre Dame, very little chance. Let's be real. I mean, how many times are we going to put Notre Dame in the college football playoff, and then them just get destroyed? How many times are we going to do it? Let's just stop doing it. Let's just stop with Notre Dame, okay? If they go undefeated, all right, then it's annoying, but they lose one game, they're done. I'm just sick of hearing about it. I really am. But I'm just telling you guys, these scenarios are nightmares that I really hope do not happen, but there are a lot of them out there. The key thing, Alabama... The main thing is we have to accept at this point, very likely Alabama and Georgia are making the playoff. I mean, the FPI is ridiculous. They have them both at, 80% chance. I don't think it's that high, especially for Alabama, but they're very likely both making the playoff. You have to keep it at 2 teams at the most, and ideally you would love maybe Alabama goes into the SEC championship game with 1 loss, and they face Georgia, who's undefeated, and Georgia beats Alabama, and then Alabama gets knocked out of the playoff, and the SEC only gets 1 team in. That's the best case scenario. It's Georgia. I mean, you'd love Georgia to lose more games. Who is Georgia losing to? That's the problem. Maybe Florida, maybe Auburn. How is Auburn ranked, folks? How are they ranked? But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you are following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.